Thank you all for joining us today for our session around securing productivity for state and local government. We truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to engage with Revanti and Microsoft. A little bit about Revanti. They are a Microsoft partner that has a team packed with expertise in all things Microsoft. The team at Revanti is ready to help organizations deliver a more collaborative, more productive, and more secure experience for organizations around the world. A few housekeeping items. This is a live event that is being recorded. We will be sharing the recording with each of you. If you have questions on any of the content presented today, feel free to enter them into the Q&A and our team will take action to help answer them. All right, our speakers for today, Nick and Yesai. These two gentlemen come loaded with a deep wealth of knowledge around Microsoft's tools and its impact on end users. And I know for a fact, you will walk away with more insights on securing productivity with Microsoft's suite of tools by the time this is over. All right, enough from me. Yesai, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shane. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar where we'll be talking about the power of Windows 365. And to start off, I'm Yesai Chuljian with Revanti Tech Consulting. It's a pleasure being here today. And with me, I also have Nick Cordova from Microsoft, who is part of the state and local government team, and he'll talk through. We'll start off initially. He'll talk through and then I'll have a presentation afterwards, and then we'll definitely go through a deep dive demo where we'll go through and actually configuring Windows 365, what that looks like, and then what the experience is like for the end user logging into a Windows 365 environment. So again, I want to thank you all for being here. We're super excited to present you and talk about Windows 365 and how to really bring that into state and local government and how to increase productivity, and how we'll talk about all the benefits and all the great things about Windows 365. So, and Nick, thank you for joining. If you want to maybe introduce yourself to kind of start off, and then we'll kind of start our meeting.
Awesome, thanks, Yesai. Hey everyone, my name is Nick Cordova. I'm a cloud endpoint technical specialist here at Microsoft. And what that really means is that I help customers with modern management, which includes Intune, identity access management, and then we also cover Windows 365. I'm specific to state and local government customers, and I cover primarily customers on the West Coast. So nice to be here today. Thank you to the Revanti team for having me, and I'm excited to dive into Windows 365.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for that introduction. So let's kind of start off, Nick, and talk about Windows 365. So kind of to present to the audience, what is Windows 365? Like, what is it? How does it differ from what we have today with Azure Virtual Desktop? And what are some of the use cases and benefits in the state and local government environment? Maybe we want to kind of talk through that and kind of present that to the team. So before, as we begin our presentation.
Yeah, thanks. And great question. We get this question a lot in the field from our customers. You know, what is Windows 365 and what is the difference between traditional cloud VDI solutions? And I like to kind of start with the history and why this solution came to be. So Windows 365 was a solution that really came to be because of what we were hearing from customers and feedback we were getting on traditional cloud VDI. This stemmed from anything that we heard from, you know, traditional cloud VDI is difficult to deploy, it's difficult to manage, you know, it takes a lot of resources, whether that be time and people. The ramping to learn virtualization isn't as easy. So we took this feedback and wanted to create a solution that really was that software as a service experience that came to be Windows 365. So the whole purpose behind it was to solve for some of those pain points that we heard from customers previously deploying Cloud VDI or Azure Virtual Desktop. And so what we did is package it together It's now a M365 license. The deployment and management is done through Intune, and there are much less steps to do a full deployment, as well as the upkeep and maintenance of the solution once it's deployed is much less overhead than traditional cloud VDI. So those are some of the initial things that were the reasoning behind the Windows 365 solution being created. Another point that we heard quite a bit was that the charging model of AVD and Cloud VDI was a little bit all over the place. Again, it was based on resources, so it was really hard to predict how much an environment might cost for that month. Again, that was another problem that's been solved by Windows 365, being a fixed cost per user per month license. So that's a little bit of the history behind Windows 365 and why it was created. I like to also talk about how it benefits my customers, specifically in state and local government. And again, some of the things, there's a lot of overlap in why the solution was created and why it's helpful for state and local government customers, because they experience those things, those pain points, but almost to the extreme. So for instance, managing and deploying a ton of Cloud VDI instances can be very difficult for a small team of administrators that might not have the full virtualization experience or the time to ramp up on those the virtualization technical skills that it might take for a bit large deployment. So we see my customers in a lot of cases, rather than doing that, they would love kind of a turnkey solution that they're able to purchase, spin up within 30 minutes or an hour, and then assign to a user. Some of the specific use cases that they're finding a lot of value in this are, one, probably the largest use case that we see is for vendors or contractors. The reasoning behind this is because of the flexibility of the service. One, the onboarding and offboarding process of Windows 365 is a lot simpler than how that might look in a Cloud VDI scenario, whereas we're just assigning and unassigning a license, deprovisioning or provisioning a Cloud PC, and that experience is much simpler than scaling up and down resources, worrying about the complexities of charging back those vendors or contractors if that was a requirement. So some of those scenarios bring a lot of benefits to our government customers. Another one we'll see is seasonal workers or interns. Again, those users that might be in a bring your own device scenario. We're able to build and assign the end user a Cloud PC, and because we're relying on Microsoft technology, where we're still able to instill zero trust network architecture, we don't mind what that device the end user is connecting to, and it allows for a lot of flexibility as an organization to be able to have the management of all the organizational data captured within that Cloud PC. So I think those are some of the kind of high profile use cases that we're seeing in state and local government. Again, the solution is really in its infancy, so I think we'll start to see a lot of additional use cases as the product progresses and people uncover new ways to use this. So I'll stop there and pass it over to Yesai to go through the presentation. But yeah, that's kind of the history of Windows 365 and how it came to be, and some of the big ways that we're seeing it in state and local government.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for all that great information. Yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of use cases and so many benefits. I mean, you mentioned a couple of things when it comes to cost, Nick. I thought that was really powerful because cost is something that, especially maybe in state and local government, you might have a fixed budget, or you might have a certain amount that you need to spend on architecture. If you have an Azure Virtual Desktop environment where you have to scale up and down, cost might be a concern because 1 month it might be high, 1 month it might be low. You're not entirely sure what your cost is, so you might go over budget, under budget. So it's good to have a license-based model versus a consumption-based model. And as you mentioned, great points as far as easy to spin up and down as needed. It's you can also scale, and we'll talk about some of the scalability as well, where if somebody needs a higher more resources on a Windows 365 environment, you can assign a higher license accordingly. And of course, once they no longer need it, you can take away that license and you can leverage it, and another user can actually leverage it. So the use case around seasonal workers and hybrid workers, where they come in, you're not sure what machine they're on. They log in from any machine, they access the Windows 365 environment, all their apps, everything is there, streamed to the device. And we'll talk through that shortly. But those are all some talking points, Nick. So I appreciate you presenting that to the team, just to kind of give a background of where Windows 365 came from and where it's going. We've seen a lot of movement with it. A lot of organizations are starting to adapt it, especially customers who are already familiar with Azure Virtual Desktop. So this is your Windows 365 Cloud PC, right? Your content wherever you go. Basically, all your content wherever you go is there on the desktop, no matter what machine you're logging in from. There's different compute options, as I just talked about. So depending on the user and depending on how much resources they need, you might have certain users that might need dual processors with 8 gigs of memory versus other users who are power users that might need higher resources. So of course you can provide different options to the end users. Consistent settings across your devices. That's very important because your cloud PCs, and we'll see that shortly, are connected through Intune. So all the Windows configuration profiles, everything that you have pushed through Intune will push to this device. So no matter what device you're on, the minute you log on to your Windows 365 environment, your desktop will be there. It's persistent. It's the same look and feel as you logged in a day ago or a week ago. Everything is there. All the apps you need are there. Scalable solution based on your needs, scalable storage based on your needs. So depending on how much storage you need, you of course you have connect your OneDrive and other connectivity to upload files accordingly, and access your files from OneDrive. And unified security and identity management. Of course, you can single sign on to the Windows 365 environment. From there, single sign on to all your other apps. And unified security, obviously you push Defender. So pushing the Defender products, Defender for Endpoint, and then having it managed through Intune. So basically, it's a unified experience, and everything is directly on it, and we'll kind of see it. So it's a new solution for today's hybrid workforce. In today's world, everybody's all over the place, right? We're in a world where users have different types of machines. You have users working from home. You have seasonal workers. You have temp workers. You have workers working in the office. So it's really able to adapt to the different types of workforce you have. And you'll kind of see that once we kind of go through the demo. You'll see when we show the different things. You'll see the different options that are available. And once we actually show how the logon experience, you'll see the consistent experience when you log on to the machine. And it works seamlessly with Microsoft Government Services. You have your Azure AD Identity, you have your Microsoft 365 apps. It's managed through Endpoint Manager, and of course, Defender for Endpoint to manage the device and make sure it's secure. If there's any vulnerabilities, any issues with the device, it's all reported in the Defender portal. So it works seamlessly across the Microsoft Government Services and across Entra ID. So everything's there, and we'll see that shortly once we kind of go through the demo. It's Windows in the cloud, so it's loved by users. It's trusted by TY. It's streamed to any device. Like I mentioned, whatever device I'm on, if I'm on a Mac, if I'm on a Windows, now there's different experience coming from a Mac. I personally use a Mac myself and a Windows environment, so it's not necessarily only to log in from Windows. There is a dedicated Windows 365 app, and we'll show that shortly. You can also log in from a Mac device through the remote desktop client. Currently, there is no dedicated Windows 365 app for the Mac, but that's something that potentially down the road will come in the pipe. It's familiar, right? So you're logging into your machine. You're familiar with what Windows looks like, right? So users love it because they log in no matter what machine they're on. They click on the Windows 365 app, they log into their desktop, they work like whatever they need to do. Once they're done, they close the machine, they go home. If they decide at home, if they decide from a different location, now, of course, as from the admin side, you could control where they could log in from through conditional access policies and things like that. So all that access is through your control because the device, because technically it's a logon event, you could control who can log on from what device they can log on from. So, all of that you could control. So it's trusted by IT, loved by users, right? So it's scalable, it's resilient, predictable cost. Nick mentioned this. You have a fixed cost. You know that for these amount of users, this is how much it's going to cost for my machines. You can run it on the Microsoft hosted network without incurring additional networking costs. There is also hybrid join options where the device can be joined to Azure AD and your on-premise environment. If you want to go with the hybrid model, you could connect it through your Azure network connection to your local network and do it that way as well. Or you can go native Azure AD join, and we'll look at some of those options as we move ahead. So, it's personalized, right? All your apps, content, everything is streamed to any device. So, regardless what device you're logging into the same desktop. They're powerful. You have dual core options, quad core options with, different memory options and different storage options. And of course, it's secure. It embeds a lot of the Windows 11 security features. And of course, through Defender for Endpoint, you have different, and through Intune, you have different configurations that you push to the device. All of that would be pushed to those devices. If you use, say, Defender for, DLP for Endpoint, as an example, you can basically have a secure environment where a user can log in, do their work. However, you can restrict them from copying, pasting, or removing any data off that machine. Even though they're logging in to that machine, when they try to copy data off of it, it will restrict them because you have DLP for Endpoint configured. So there are a lot of different ways it's great for the end user, and there's a lot of also security benefits you get with the product. So, and we'll see that. So, it's end users securely access, like I said, from wherever they are, it enables a lot of hybrid use cases, right? So if you have users who are, bringing their own machine, right? That's one of the things a lot of times you don't want a user to bring their own machine and log into their account and download their OneDrive to their local machine, because you don't know if that machine is protected. You have no control over it, right? So with the Windows 365 environment, they basically log in from their machine into the Windows 365 environment, and there's nothing from their machine that's getting onto the Windows 365 environment. So it gives you that peace of mind on that front. So, and it's a hybrid Windows, so you can see, and we'll see that shortly once we actually go through the Windows 365 experience for the user. You'll see the all their cloud PCs are there. I'll also show you some restore options. It's one of the great benefits is there is built-in restore service where users can actually restore their own Windows 365 PC. Let's say they did something, they removed something and they can't find it, or they want to revert their Windows PC back to an earlier state. Generally, they'd have to reach out to IT. IT would have to go, run some restore. Imagine on your personal machine, if something happens and you need to restore it. Do you have any options? There's a lot of admin overhead, and in order to make that happen. With Windows 365, you can essentially allow the user to click a button, restore their machine to an earlier state, and they're up and running with zero IT intervention. So there's a lot of great things that's being built into it. And Nick kind of brought this up. There's enhancing it more and more. So they're adding more and more features to it, making it more and more powerful as time goes. So you'll see a lot of that when we kind of go through the demo. And, some of the things when you look at users using their own machine, right? They, is the data secure? Like if they're using your own machine, you don't know if the data, if they store the data on their machine, is it going to be secure? What's that environment like, right? Am I meeting compliance requirements on the device, right? So there's a lot of things when you have remote workforce using their own machine. There's a lot of things from a security perspective that you wonder, is this machine secure? Is it compliant? You know, is it a compliant device that they're coming from, right? Am I able to control it? Am I able to see push you know, settings onto it? A lot of times with the personal device, obviously you can't do that. You'd have to register it with your Intune. A lot of times you don't want to do that because you don't want to be responsible for their own device. In this case, you can, like I mentioned earlier, one of the great things was, you know, users use their own machine, they log into the Windows 365 environment, and you as an IT have a peace of mind that it's fully secure because everything is pushed through Intune onto that device. So, you know, it's secure by design. So, you know, it gives you kind of all those security controls in place. You know, like I mentioned with Defender for Endpoint, all your security, all the settings that you have, you can see it in the Defender for Endpoint portal. You can see the device, all the vulnerabilities. If there's anything logs, if there's any logs or anything on that machine, you can go look at the activity. If there's anything, you know, there's a lot you can see from the Defender for Endpoint on that device. So kind of gives you that peace of mind. And, you know, it enables a lot of different scenarios. Bring your own PC, I mentioned, hybrid, you know, mergers, acquisitions, you merge with a different company. You know, you have to now worry about, okay, I have to go out and buy a lot of these devices. How am I going to do this? Where am I going to reach out to? You know, I have to set up all these devices. I have to ship out all these devices. Well, you know, you can create the users, assign them a Windows 365 PC. They log in with their credentials. They have access pretty much, you know, it takes about 20, 30 minutes, obviously, to provision. But, you know, they're up and running pretty quickly. And, you know, IT doesn't have to kind of scramble around to, you know, format a bunch of machines, get them all joined to your network, you know, get them all configured. You know, there's a lot of setup that's involved. So there's a lot of unique scenarios where Windows 365 can really bring power to, you know, state and local government environment. So, and if, you know, Nick talked about the zero trust, right? So all your security, you know, all your conditional access policies, you know, you have your endpoint DLP policies and any other policies you push onto the device, you know, users log in, you know, they MFA onto the machine, they through their credentials, that's how they're authenticating, they log in, and then everything else on the device is secured through Intune, and you have a pretty secure environment from there. And you know, we'll see that shortly once I kind of go through the Windows 365 environment. So, and now we'll move on to the demo. This is where I'm actually gonna go through the Windows 365 experience and kind of show you what it looks like from the admin side, right? What does it look like in Intune? So here we're at endpoint.microsoft.com. Here you have an overview of the Cloud PC. So in this first screen, you see all the Cloud PCs. I currently have a single Cloud PC already provisioned. So essentially, this is the machine that's already provisioned. So to kind of start off, in order to get, it's a two-step process in order to get a Cloud PC created for a user. Number one, the first process is actually license-based, right? The user has to have the appropriate license for Windows 11 Cloud PC. Once they're licensed, their second step is the provisioning policy. So you have a provisioning policy, and we'll kind of go through and actually create it. So the provisioning policy configures the Windows 365 machine. So you specify the different settings, and we'll kind of go through that here. So what I recommend, and one way that I did it personally, is I created a group, and that group has an auto license that automatically licenses for Windows 11 Cloud PC. And once that's done, then I configure my, I assign my provisioning policy to that group, and automatically once a user gets added to that group, they get the license, they get the provisioning policy, the Windows 365 environment gets provisioned, and the user's up and running. So here we have the provisioning policy. So we're looking at creating a net new policy. So we'll go through and we'll say, okay, Windows 365 provisioning policy. So we're actually going in and creating it. Provisioning policy, okay. Now you can name it whatever you want. Here we'll specify a description. So we'll just say our provisioning policy for our Windows 365 devices, right? So here you'll see license type. Now there's Enterprise, which is a one-to-one license model. So each user uses their own license and it's persistent. There's also Frontline, which is basically a way you can share the license where you can have one license be used by 3 different users. However, the caveat is 3 users cannot use it simultaneously. So that's Windows 365 Frontline. We'll have some more details on that. There are some limitations within the government space on Windows 365 Frontline, but that's something that there is information for available. Below you, there's the different join type option. So I talked about this earlier. The first one by default is Microsoft Entra Join. That's basically where the device is only Azure AD joined or Entra ID joined to kind of stay consistent with the new naming model. The second option is the hybrid Azure AD join or hybrid Microsoft Entra join, where the device is joined to your Active Directory and to Entra ID. So here, if you actually choose that option, you have to specify an Azure network connection. You'd have to have an Azure subscription and virtual network set up. So for this demo and for our provisioning policy, I don't want to manage the network. I don't want to have access to manage it or be responsible for it. So I'm going to have it Microsoft Entra join and be hosted on the Microsoft network. Here I'll specify the geography, so I'm going to go ahead and put the location. So I'm going to say US West. Now, depending on your provisioning policy and depending on their users, if you have certain users in different parts of the country, right? So you might create separate provisioning policies and put, certain users in US West versus certain users in US East. That's just for connectivity and where the actual machines are provisioned. So kind of would reduce the latency. So you want to create it based on that. And of course, region, if currently, you can set it to automatic where it'll choose which region within that geography to provision the Windows 365 PCs. And here we have a single sign-on option where you can actually single sign on directly onto the Windows 365 PC, and we'll see that shortly. So as we move ahead, here we choose the images, right? So we have different images you can choose from, anywhere from Windows 10 to Windows 11. The default one and what's chosen by default is Windows 11 Enterprise plus Microsoft 365 app, which also has OS optimizations built in, which optimizes the OS on the Windows 365 machine for the Windows 365 environment, so it optimizes the operating system on it. And it comes with the Microsoft 365 apps built into the image. Now, you can also, if you have Intune configured and you're pushing Microsoft 365 apps, you can do that as well. But this image actually has Windows 11 and the 365 apps provisioned from the get-go. So when the user logs in, they have all their 365 apps without waiting for Intune to deploy it on there. So for this demo, I will go ahead and choose Windows 365, the image with the Microsoft 365 apps. Here we'll go to configuration, right? We'll choose the language and region. So I'll put here, depending on the different regions and language, if you want to kind of change the Windows, the language and region settings on it, you can modify it here. Here, what's great as well, you can apply device name template, right? So you can name your devices based on certain criteria. There are some limitations, so it must be within, say, 15 characters, so you can put the different naming conventions, so you can search for them if you want to do any sort of filtering, tagging, things along those lines, right? So there's some use cases for that if you choose to do so. If you don't, it'll get the name will be something like CPC dash the user's prefix and then a random number at the end. So, and you'll see that once we look at the Windows 365 PC that I currently have provisioned. Now there's some additional services here for auto patch. So Windows Auto Patch is a service where Microsoft manages the patching on that machine end to end. It's a separate service, and basically they control, you have different patching groups, so you can put devices in different patching groups and have some devices be, say, in a early stage where they want to see the latest updates versus other devices might, be in kind of the regular channel where they'll get devices once it's available to the public. So there's different options for that. In this case, I'm not setting them for Windows Auto Patch service, but that's something that you can configure as part of the provisioning policy, right? Here is where we assign the group, right? So earlier I mentioned the group. So you create a group. As an example, in my case, I have a group called Cloud PC-users, right? that group also, I have an auto license, which once you get added to that group, it automatically licenses the Windows. It automatically gives you the Windows 365 license. Now, one thing to think about, one thing that you should be cognizant of, if you do go with that route, you want to make sure that you, of course, have enough licenses available, because if you start mass adding users into that group, of course, not all of them can consume the licenses. So whoever you add first will consume the licenses. If there's no more available, then they can't consume it, which in turn means that they won't actually provision a Windows 365 Cloud PC for them. So just something to think about on that front. So here we can, add the group. In my case, I can go through and I can choose the group that I want to add. I can say Cloud PC users. And once we do that, then we go and review and create. Here we'll see a summary of everything that we just provisioned. So think of the provisioning policy as kind of like you're kind of imaging the machine without necessarily imaging. You're just kind of configuring the basic settings of it, right? This is one time you do it, set it and forget it, right? Everything else as far as Windows, as far as like settings onto the machine, as far as anything else that you're pushing, any other apps you're pushing, it's all pushed through Intune. So the great part is once it's Azure AD join, once the Windows 365 PC is provisioned, you'll see it in Intune. You can manage it, right? You can push your apps, your settings, everything's there. So you don't have to worry about, okay, now I have to go do something different for Windows 365 cloud PCs. You don't have to do that because it's all embedded within your Intune. So, and once we create it, then we'll have the Windows 365 provisioning policy, and we have it here and it's configured and it's ready to go. Now, one thing I did want to show you, and I talked about this earlier, and it's basically the backup restore service, right? So here these are the different user settings. So if you want to enable local admin for users, so you can basically make them a local admin, and you can also add users and make them, give them the capability to reset their cloud PC. So essentially it will allow the user to go in and say, reset this PC, or reset it back to kind of factory settings. So if you want to allow them to do that, you can specify the setting here, and it will allow them to re-provision their cloud PCs. And again, I mentioned like making them a local admin. If you choose to do so, you can do that as well. And this is great. And I mentioned this earlier, you can allow the users to initiate the restore service, and we'll see that when I log into my Windows 365 cloud PC. I have different restore points where I could go in and restore my cloud PC, right? And you can specify the time. You can say 4 hours, 6 hours. Now, depending on your environment, you might not necessarily need to be too aggressive. I mean, depending on the use case, right? So you have different user setting policies, right, that you assign to different groups. So if you want a certain group to have, say, admin capability and have, say, 6 hours restore points versus another group having 12 hours, you could specify that and configure that. Again, it's set it and forget it. So once you create it one time, you assign the groups to the different policies and the different settings. Once you do that one time, then from there, you just add the users to the groups. Now, one thing that's unrelated, but you can also leverage access packages, which is a different topic, of course, but essentially that will allow you to automatically add and remove users from different groups. That's part of a separate conversation, but that's another way that you can add the users automatically to groups. It's part of Microsoft's identity governance package, where you can govern access to different groups and apps and SharePoint sites and things like that. So that would be a perfect use case for here. And actually in my demo, that's how I have it configured. User requests it and they get added to a group, and then everything gets configured. So this is something I wanted to kind of mention, just kind of an outside use case for that. So here we'll name it, user settings. In my case, I don't want them to have local admin access. I don't want them to re-provision their cloud PCs. However, I want them to be able to restore it, and I'm going to set 12 hours so they have, it'll create a different restore point every 12 hours. Here again, same thing. We kind of similar to Intune. If you're familiar with using Intune when you're creating apps and when you're creating Windows configuration profiles, you go and you actually assign the group to it. So similar like you do everything else in Intune, you assign it, you hit next. Once you do that, you create the user settings, and then it's applied onto the user who's using the Cloud PC. Now, one thing to note, regardless of, a user might have multiple Cloud PCs for different use cases, right? They might have a dual, let's say you have a user that might need a daily driver and that might need a secondary Cloud PC for, testing or demo or something like that, right? So you can have different user policies, and you can assign them depending on, depending on which user you're assigning it to. So again, you could kind of configure it. It's all kind of using the same Intune model of assigning to groups, right? So that's important to know, if you're familiar with it, if you're familiar with doing that, it's kind of the same concept. So now kind of going back to the Cloud PCs, you'll see here I have a Cloud PC configured, and here's all the settings, right? You can have, laps if you want to do local admin, like the password management on the machine. You see the device diagnostics, you look at the hardware, discovered apps, if you have compliance policy. There's a lot of things that you can do. Once it becomes, comes here, then it becomes an Azure AD joined machine. And if you're familiar with using Intune and managing all your machines through Intune, it's kind of the same concept, right? And then you could create different groups for the devices, so you can push different policies accordingly. So this is all great. This is all from the admin side, right? So now let's switch to the user, right? So if I'm a user and I'm coming in and I want to log into my Windows 365 PC, you might ask, well, how do I do that? So here I'm going to actually go ahead and show you that, right? So here I'm logged in as our user, Alex, and user goes to windows365.microsoft.com. They log in and they see, oh, I have a Cloud PC ready for me to go, Windows 11, everything's kind of configured. So I'm going to first show you some of the different options, and then I'll show you how to log in from both a browser and also logging in through the Windows 365 native app, right? So here we'll have the dots here. I can choose to restart it if I wanted to. Now here, if I'm logging into it, I'm rarely going to go in and just restart it from here. But in case I log into it and I see there's certain issues and I want to restart, I can do that. What I talked about earlier is the restore, right? So I can say, oh, I did something on my machine. I want to restore back to, say, 1 day ago, right? I want to restore back to yesterday around this time. So I go look at my restore points and I see, oh, what's the latest? I see one yesterday at 6:05 a.m. Great. I want to restore it. So as a user, I can choose this. I'm not going to do it for this demo just because of timing. It'll take a little bit of time to kind of get it restored. So I can click restore here, and actually it will start to reprovision my machine back to that earlier state, and then I can log into it. So, as you can see, no admin level controls. Admin didn't have to go in and do anything specific. Now, again, if you choose to allow this, that's available. If you decide that, hey, I don't want them to do that, I don't want them to restore, that's not something our organization wants to allow, then of course you can restrict it, but it's an option that I definitely wanted to kind of show you. So the first thing is, and here we'll go to the drop down, we have two options, right? First one says open in browser, and the second one says open in desktop app. So like me personally, I use Windows 365 as a daily driver, right? So I use it daily to kind of do my different tasks. So there's times where I'll actually go through the Windows 365 apps, and there's been cases where I'm on a different machine. I might be here and there, I might be kind of out and about, and I'm on my machine and I quickly need to log on to my machine, right? So sometimes I'll just go to the browser, I'll log in, I'll sign in, and I'll have access to it, right? So I might be on my Mac, or I might be on a different machine, maybe that doesn't have the Windows 365 app downloaded, or I'm on somebody else's machine that I don't want to install Windows 365 on, right? So I don't want to kind of go through that. So then I can kind of click and go through the browser experience, right? So from here, open up my machine through the browser. It'll kind of load the client here. Here's the different settings that I can actually pass through from my machine. If I want to pass my camera and clipboard, you can choose to save the settings. Then it says connecting to your Cloud PC. And, shortly you'll see my Cloud PC will kind of come up. And, let's give it a minute or so, and probably less than that. Hopefully within 30 seconds, if not less, we'll load into my cloud PC, and I'm up and running in the browser. I'm using my machine like I would be using my own machine, but it's fully secure, right? And you'll see once I get in, you'll see the apps. Here, as an administrator, my organization installed, Adobe Acrobat and Firefox. It got pushed to the machine. As you can see, the user has, all their apps configured. You have Word, all my apps. If I launch Outlook as it's configured, I have my Outlook client configured, and it's ready and up and running. So, everything's kind of there for me. Everything's kind of set up. If I want to log into Teams, all my apps, everything's kind of configured and ready to go. So this is kind of the browser experience. So it's pretty, depending on the user's comfort level, some users will prefer to kind of use this option. It's a hybrid model, so you can kind of use it the way that you feel fit for you. So you could see, sometimes I like this because you can tab between here. You can tab in here. Now I'm using Firefox, so they're different containerized windows here. So this is my admin account, and this is my, end user account. So they're logged in, all their apps are there. I'm logging into Outlook and doing whatever I need to do. I'm familiar with my desktop. Whenever I don't need it, I go, okay, I'm just going to close it, leave the page, and then kind of continue when I'm back. So nothing really happens. The desktop is there in its same state. Now, the second way you're logging in is through your desktop. So it's going to ask me, do you want to open it with the remote desktop app, which you can. You can also, on a Mac, there is, like I mentioned, there is no native Windows 365 app for the Mac. So you would actually have to use a remote desktop client to log in on the Mac. But on the Windows, you have both the remote desktop and the Windows 365 app. I prefer using the Windows 365 app so you can, because it just gives you a better experience overall. And then you can use that to kind of log in. So here it's going to actually authenticate me, open the Windows 365 app, and directly I'm gonna, once I'm fully signed in, in this case I'm gonna kind of go in and actually sign in. And once I'm signed in, oh, sorry about that. For some reason, it is not logging into. Okay. So once it's kind of signed into, it authenticates me, it will single sign me on, and I'm essentially going to log into that same exact desktop that I just logged into from, the browser, right? Everything's exactly the same. It kind of brings me back to where I left off. I had Teams open, I had my Outlook open. So I kind of continue where I'm at, right? I don't need to, it doesn't like, my machine wasn't on sleep, so I kind of came back and I continued, right? Quickly, I'm able to quickly transition to my work exactly the same way as I was for my browser, so my desktop's there, all my apps are configured, I'm up and running. So as you can see, it's pretty seamless for the user, right? They authenticate, they single sign on, everything's kind of there for them. All their apps are streamed, they're comfortable, they're familiar with it. They use their own machine. Again, once I'm done, I'm done. I kind of close it out, and it kind of brings me back to where I'm at. So, and yeah, that kind of brings us to the end of our demo here for Windows 365. So I hope this was helpful for everybody. It gives you a great overview, and I hope Nick's thoughts and comments he mentioned about Windows 365 and its different use cases were also helpful, along with some of the things we talked about in the presentation and the demo. So I hope this gives you a great perspective on what is Windows 365 and how we can kind of leverage it in our environment and kind of how much power it could bring for us and our workforce. So I hope this was helpful. I really appreciate everybody's time.